the early 1930s. The Great Depression is in full swing, and the nation is gripped with economic despair. FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the creature that I named my dog after. I mean the guy, the President of the United States, not a creature.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
He was just elected president at this time, and he promised a new deal to lift the country out of the financial abyss that it found itself within as a result of the Great Depression, the big scare, or whatever. A lot of old people talk about it and stuff, and they ate salt and dirt and things like that for months. Pretty wild. Imagine this on top of imagining that. Behind the scenes, a group of incredibly powerful businessmen were hatching a plan like Dr. Evil and Number 2. A plan so audacious that it aimed to overthrow the government of the United States of America. This is not Austin Powers 4. This is real life. It's called The Business Plot.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
And this video is about the CIA and coups. And we're going to talk about all this today in this long-ass video that we've been working on for a while. So if you want to see more content like this, press the like button. And also, if you don't want to see anything like this ever again, press the like button as well. We'll be talking about the business plot first, and then we will go into the CIA. Obviously, the CIA did not come into existence until 1947. This is 1933, but once again, in my opinion, it really sets the stage. The business plot does, that is. AKA the Wall Street Putsch, whatever the that means. That's some 1930s talk, all right? That's some transatlantic colloquialisms. In 1933, the Wall Street Putsch, aka the business plot, was a political conspiracy put forth by a couple of plotters that aimed to overthrow FDR as a result of his New Deal policies.
During the campaign of 1932, FDR's promise of jobs for the unemployed frightened businessmen who feared he would turn their capitalist nation socialist and engage in what they viewed as reckless government spending.
They wanted to dismantle that whole idea. They believed that these policies were steering the United States of America towards socialism, and that's not good, or they didn't think it was at the time, and they believed that these new policies were detrimental to the interests of, well, themselves, and they just thought they were God, so themselves. They believed that these policies were bad, harmful to their money. In the minds of these plotters, Roosevelt was an existential threat to everything that they held dear, and they were determined to stop him at any cost. These weren't just random people. This wasn't like your classic revolution, 1776 style, or whenever the French ones happened. There was a lot of them. These were influential figures of the time. People who ran major corporations, people who ran financial institutions. If you couldn't have guessed, the titans of America.
The fathers of the industrial age.
What was their plan exactly? Well, it was to create a private army financed by their immense wealth as masters of the universe and march on Washington, D.C. and force FDR out of office, which is incredibly bold. Enter Major Smedley Butler, a retired Marine Corps officer and two-time Medal of Honor recipient.
The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions.
How do you get 2 Medals of Honor in World War I? Do you have to die twice? That's crazy. Butler, as you can imagine by his 2 Medals of Honor, was a man of honor, a true patriot and the absolute last person you'd ever expect to be involved in a conspiracy such as this. Yet, he found himself at the center of the plot when he was approached by the conspirators to lead their private army. He was their chosen dictatorial leader.
My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institutions. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write.
But Butler stood on business, and he was no ordinary man, okay? He was a man who had seen the dark side of power and corruption. He was not easily swayed.
If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe.
He even publicly supported FDR. And as you might guess, after what I just said, instead of deciding to join the plot, he decided to expose the shit out of it. He testified before Congress, he revealed the details of the conspiracy, and he named the key figures involved. Wow. And while Mr. Smedley's testimony made headlines, many lesser-known details revealed the true depth of the conspiracy and the mindset of the powerful people of that time and why they exactly wanted to do this. A couple of the people involved, one of them you're not going to believe. Actually, you'll probably believe it. It's Donald Trump.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Just kidding. It's a lie. But one of the plot's primary financiers is Gerald McGuire, a bond salesman. It sounds boring as fuck. He served as a liaison between the business elite and potential military leaders that they would install when their coup was successful. McGuire traveled extensively to gather support and intelligence for this plot. This really truly underscores the seriousness in which they approached this treasonous nonsense. Another key figure, little guy named Prescott Bush. Ever heard of him? Maybe the last name rings a bell. He is the father of future President George H.W. Bush and the grandfather of future President George W. Bush. Hey guys, did you hear my granddad tried to overthrow the United States of America in 1933? Shit's crazy.
Now watch this drive.
Now, to be fair to Mr. Prescott, his involvement remains a bit of a subject to debate, but he had very many connections to the powerful men behind the plot. And this whole thing at this point is probably unbelievable to you. Because I know when I first learned about it, it was unbelievable to me. Oh, and you know what else is interesting? Well, you might find it interesting at least. The son of Prescott Bush, aka George H.W. Bush, if that is his real name, would later become the director of the CIA, the funny little three-letter agency I'm talking about in today's video primarily. And this is kind of a striking thing, maybe, if you ask me. And then you've got, I don't want to get too conspiratorial.
There's an attack on the species by a guild of psychopaths, and they must be defeated. I'm gonna settle down.
We're gonna really stick to kind of established facts here in this video, but my God, there's a lot of yarn and thumbtacks to be had and corkboard type, a lot of fun involved in this. Now, one thing that's really different about the 1930s compared to now is there was a lot of elite people who believed themselves to be the ultimate arbiters of America's destiny. Just kidding. There's a lot of people who are that's still a thing. That's like still a huge thing. But these guys back in the 30s played a crucial role in the conception, inception, and actual initiation of the business plot.
Roosevelt's New Deal policies, which addressed almost every sector of the economy in the form of regulations, social programs, and financial reforms, made him an ever-growing problem in the eyes of big business and banks.
These folk believed that their wealth and influence genuinely entitled them to direct the course of the nation, the United States of America. To be fair, nothing like what it is now, right? Kind of like before everything really took off post-World War II. We kind of got real awesome after that, the whole Cold War and shit, and the big boom we saw after World War II. But like the whole military-industrial complex combined with this mindset, you did a lot of obvious shit. Just saying. That sets the stage, I hope, a little bit. We just talked about the business plot. I implore you to read a book or two on it. There may only be a few, I'm not exactly sure, but there's plenty of information out there. This sets the stage for what we are now to talk about, and that is the CIA and the obsession with the American government and overthrowing small governments
by the Western Secret Services, who aimed to infiltrate Albania and overthrow the communist regime of Enver Hoxha.
And big ones. What the fuck?
Let's talk about the time that the American government orchestrated a coup to depose an Australian Prime Minister.
The CIA was established in 1947, shortly after the end of the Second World War. President Harry S. Truman signed the National Security Act and gave unprecedented powers to a bunch of awesome three-letter agencies. The Atomic Energy Council, which became the DOE, I think, and then the CIA, and then, Yo Mama, because she's big, and she has unprecedented size and power.
Please clap.
Now, so what does the CIA do? I know a couple of guys who are in the CIA who were in the CIA. I know one guy who was hanging out in Islamabad when Osama bin Laden died. I'm not saying there's any sort of correlation or anything like that, but I've got his shirt. And I wear it sometimes. And I think he's died now. I think he passed on. Anyways, if you are one to believe what the government tells you, the CIA is an agency that simply collects, evaluates, and disseminates information that has been gathered on economic, military, political, and scientific developments around the world, beyond just the borders of the United States of America. And the honest intent from A to Z is to safeguard national security. That is what the official story is. That's what I like to believe.
Our mission is straightforward but critical. Leverage the power of information to keep our nation safe. Our problem set is complex and cannot be solved by one person alone.
But what I don't like to believe is that there's a lot of crazy shit that happens in the interests of our nation's security and stability and in our interests.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CIA.
We have some interesting interests, it seems like. On the CIA's official website, they tout themselves as the nation's first line of defense. They accomplish what others simply cannot accomplish, and they go where others simply cannot go. Classic American government propaganda. I love it. I used to have Marine Corps posters all in my room when I was a kid, you know, because I love the Marine Corps. But I am not a fascist bootlicker, so not that big of a fan of propaganda, to be honest. But still love the American government, by the way, just to be clear. But we're talking about the CIA, which is kind of like the edgy teenager of the government.
For the first time now, the CIA has released documents that show its role in the 1953 coup.
So yeah, that's what the CIA does if you're keen on drinking the US Gov Flavor Aid. Beside the CIA, you've probably heard of other three-letter agencies like the FBI or the NSA or all the other ones. But unlike the FBI and the NSA, the CIA spies on foreigners. The FBI and NSA spies on us. The CIA was built to focus on overseas affairs and thus has no capacity to perform law enforcement functions on American soil or gather intelligence on American citizens. Now, I'm not so sure about that. Based on what I believe and know and have learned, that is public information, but we'll see.
Under code names like MK Ultra, the CIA spent 25 years and $25 million on secret mind control research.
Now, let's begin our exploration of some coups. I would like to consider these funny little coups to be the product of the CIA when they were at their most powerful and had their furthest reach with the littlest amount of oversight. All very fun things, especially when combined and given unprecedented power from the United States government. Can you believe this is real life? I'm gonna be using the word coup a lot. I assume most of you know what it is, but I will go ahead and give a definition. A coup, a sudden, violent, and unlawful seizure of power from a government. Yeah, a coup d'etat. They've happened a lot. There's a whole shit ton of them. Okay, guys, and we've done a lot ourselves. We've done a whole shit ton of them. In the early 1960s, before the times of trouble in the 70s, political instability, economic instability flooded South America, specifically Brazil. Brazil was stricken with high inflation and some economic stagnation.
In the case of Brazil, the democratically elected government of President João Goulart, also known as Jango, was overthrown by an opposition faction within the armed forces, supported by the more conservative elements of Brazilian society.
These two things in unison led to some social unrest in the country. A little bit of cheeky social unrest. President
João Goulart.
I don't know how the to say his name, it's Portuguese. I'm not Portuguese, that's a hard language. A fellow known also as Jango with a J, not a D.
Military circles were suspicious of Jango due to his radical reform plans, leftist tendencies, and alleged communist ties.
His leftist policies seemed to alienate conservative sectors of Brazil's society, including the military, the business elites, and the Catholic Church, all very important pillars of civilization at those times, and still now. Jango's policies such as land reform and income redistribution created a ton of unrest in the political sphere, and it caused unease in the country. Great unease.
Goulart had begun raising taxes on corporations and increasing social spending. Later that year, the Kennedy White House was upset about President Goulart's independent foreign policy during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Jango was democratically elected vice president in 1960 alongside Jânio Quadros.
The following round of elections handed the presidency to PTB's Jânio Quadros in 1960.
This guy left power and resigned in 1961, and Jango took over. Immediately when Jango took over, he was accused of colluding with communism. At the time, very bad. You can't do it. Well, I mean, if you don't want to die, very bad. If you don't want to get killed by the CIA, very bad. He was seen as trying to break apart the military hierarchy that was established by his predecessor, because when he took office, he quickly began signing independent foreign policies. and he began expanding relations with the socialist bloc. Oh, God. He also opposed sanctions that the U.S. put against Cuba. Oh, you can't do that. Ever heard of the Bay of Pigs? We'll talk about that too later. Django's socialism kept on going throughout 1963 and 1964. He implemented more policies such as the profit remittance law and the expropriation of private land and oil refinery laws, which angered a lot of people and foreign investors specifically. And in light of this, conservative forces mobilized against him. This includes the CIA. Oh yeah, baby, here we go. I'm on their side. Always choose the CIA. Django also was kind of like the Jimmy Carter of Brazil. He lost support on both sides. He sucked. He was implementing policies that neither the left or right wanted at the time, which is kind of hard to do, I feel like. I feel like shit was kind of easy back then. You just pick a side. Kind of like what you do now. You can't be a real leader and try to change shit for your own, what the f? It's like rewriting Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire or whatever. You don't know more than George R.R. Martin, you idiot. Stop. Just listen to capitalism versus communism and then just go. The CIA began their anti-Django plan in the early 1960s, and they started planning with oppositional forces to create a military coup. They did a bunch of covert operations, and they also financially supported his opposing side, the conservatives, I guess. Pretty much everybody, it seems like. Nobody liked this poor Django guy. Over time, the CIA would intensify their operations more and more. They funded media outlets. They supported anti-Django political campaigns. They built more and more connections with the Brazilian military, who fully supported the coup. Like I mentioned, that military hierarchy that existed before he came to power. The country was mad. There were food shortages, declining GDP, inflation was destroying the country, and more people are on strike and they wanted change. Down goes Django. Now, Django wasn't thought to be a full-on commie Marxist, but the connections that he held with other communists did cause a great deal of social unrest in the political sphere. People were afraid that communists would move onto their land and take control of everything that was going on. And because of all this, a coup was planned. The US stepped in. Operation Brother Sam was a go. Operation Brother Sam was awesome. It was the intended use of the United States Navy and Air Force to back up anti-Django rebels.
Gordon must have had a taste for cloak and dagger, as he recommended that the weapons be delivered via unmarked submarine to be offloaded at night in isolated shore spots in state of Sao Paulo.
So crazy, dude. We went to Operation Brother Sam. Smoke some bone, raise away the flag. Oh, that red, white, and blue! The United States provided a transfer of fuel by sea to the insurgent military and left a squadron near Brazil to take more supplies in by air. The USS Forstall, a helicopter carrier, and 6 destroyers were loaded in the Caribbean. The activities by the US were in preparation for Moralfio, who planned the coup for early April and eventually initiated the coup by mobilizing troops from Minas Gerais towards Rio de Janeiro, which is one that I can actually say because I've heard of it before. Django was very scared and he didn't want a war or a civil war or any of that stuff, and he quickly traveled from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia and then Porto Alegre. He originally intended to gather loyalist forces there, but quickly changed his mind for fear of a civil war, which once again, he did not want. He did not want war, which is good because there probably would have been a terrible civil war.
The president first flew to Brasilia, where he attempted to gather together support for the legitimate government, but he met with little success. Sensing that his defeat was a fait accompli, Django fled to his home state of Rio Grande do Sul, and then, after several days, he went into self-exile in Uruguay.
Now, like any good coup insurgent assumes, these guys assumed that they were going to mobilize and get shot at. So, they were ready to fight. I mean, this is a real battle. They even had awesome World War I tanks. I mean, what the f? Just kidding. I don't have any clue what that is. I don't even know. Is it I don't know, dude. I mean, World War II, not World War I. I don't know. What is that tank? I don't know what that is. Tell me what that is down below, guys. I really like the way it looks. I like it a lot. General Philo not only expected a lot of resistance, he expected some resistance and thought it would take around 4 months to complete this coup. However, the crisis was averted by Django himself. He vetoed the conflict to make sure there was no bloodshed, like a good guy, and quickly left the city where they were going to march in. He just left. So because of Django just leaving, the Senate declared his position vacant. It wasn't voted on or anything like that, but he ran away. He was still in the country at the time. He had not been impeached. He didn't resign. He didn't leave. This was not a legal process, but he just wasn't there. He ran away. He was like, ah! Ran off. Since he wasn't around there, nobody wanted him there, and everyone was just kind of ready to turn on him. President of the Chamber of Deputies, Ranieri Mazzilli, was next in line for succession and was sworn in as president in 1964. But then 13 days went by and another guy went in, Castelo Branco. This is all in 1964. Crazy turn of events. They think that this original guy took office so Django could officially be taken out as soon as possible, constitutionally, legally. But Castelo Branco, that guy, he's in there, man. Pretty cool guy. Look at him. He looks a little old, gonna be honest. So Mr. Branco becomes president, or dictator, I guess, the guy that the CIA and the US wanted to be the man behind Brazil. Coup dissolves, thousands of people are arrested. There's an unconstitutional president, leader, whatever. Who the cares, guys? We really dicked with it. And it was all for nothing in the end. It was a dictatorship, and eventually they developed higher relations with the Soviet Union in spite of American dominance. LBJ, not exactly a genius when it comes to, well, really anything, to be honest, yeah. Do you guys think that we would have overthrown the Brazilian government if JFK wouldn't have been assassinated? What do you think? Take a guess. Comment below. Yay! Smash like! I think it's important to note that just in general, the entire reason and involvement of the United States and the CIA for any of this shit is to stop the spread of communism during the Cold War and establish America as a hegemony. No one can come close to us, especially not those commies. That's at least what's on the package. Generally, what you get is different. You just have a president illegally sworn in who becomes a dictator and eventually becomes a red and then gets assassinated. Happened a lot. So many years have gone by. On the 40th anniversary of the coup, declassified documents shed light on the US's actual involvement in Operation Brother Sam and the 1964 coup of Brazil. We have it clearly. The information of a delivery of arms of non-US origin, of course, were made available to Mr. Branco and the supporters in Sao Paulo. These weapons were pre-positioned prior any outbreak of violence, which there was none, thankfully, and Operation Brother Sam intended to airlift 110 tons of ammunition and CS agent gas for mob control. Basically, we helped them get really ready for this shit. They were so ready, dude. We were providing as much support as possible. All of these munitions were ready to be provided within 16 hours on the US president's word. LBJ! Yay, the greatest president. The greatest president. The worst vice president, though. Oh yeah, also it was unnecessary, like we mentioned, because the opposition was way weaker than the US had guessed. Django ran away. There was no need for any heavy arms, nothing to overthrow the government, none of that. And in light of all this, Castelo Branco had his military rule until 1985. It's funny to look at their plans. They had a bunch of plans. They didn't need any of this. They had like 4 months of, we're going to put men here, and we're going to stick men here and stuff, and we're going to put a base here. The guy's like, Django literally just runs away. And I would call him a coward due to his quick surrender of his country. Just kidding. If you look into it and use your brain, it seems like he actually did care about his country. Crazy. Wow. Maybe he saw beyond the capitalists and the communists. Wow. Crazy, man. It was a no joke coup, though. If he would have died. So, you know, maybe he did. I don't know. Who cares? So yeah, Django didn't really want to concede when it came to reforms and things like that with the government. He just invoked a bloodless suicide, and there you go. That's how it goes. Fast forward 12 years to the Argentinian coup of 1976. The troubled times. I love learning about the 70s. That's when Bushes were big, and George H.W. Bush's Bush was bigger, especially in 1976. That's when he became the director of the CIA. He had a huge bush, I bet. The president of Argentina, Juan Perón, died of natural causes on July 1st, 1974. His wife, then vice president, kind of weird, kind of a, extreme power couple there, Isabel Perón, took over the country in her husband's place. Is that a good idea to have the vice president and president be wife and husband? This woman inherited this country during severe political and economic crisis. Around the whole world, we were going through a lot of trouble, but Here, South America was extra bad. There was a great deal of instability in her political power. As a result of this instability, she faced growing opposition, and on February 5th, 1975, Operativo Independencia was launched. With the launch of Operation Independence, there's a lot of complicated work that falls under this, okay guys? And I'd need an entire video to really get into the depth of Operation Independence, Operation Condor, Juan Perón, Peronism, the AAA, all of the insane shit that happened during this time, 1975 up into the early 80s, all right? It was a dirty war, 22,000 to 30,000 people died. There was guerrilla-style warfare. There were death squads, leftists were killed, communists were killed, so much shit was going on. Isabel, the once vice president, now president of Argentina, was at the head of it for a little while, and she worked closely with death squads that wanted to maintain the established order. And I mentioned Operation Condor earlier. That shit also deserves its own video. There were coups, assassination attempts, and more.
Plan Condor was the military dictatorship's hunt of leftist organizations and urban guerrilla groups that were coordinating across the region. Many of its victims were in Argentina.
And this doesn't have anything to do with CIA yet. Or does it? Oh. Basically, the point is, Argentina, 1975, things very, very, very unstable. Whatever it is. With all this uncertainty and all these battles going on, Isabel was losing political power quickly, and many of her team told her to resign. All right, she should definitely step away from it all. However, she would not back down. Crazy. Who would have guessed people don't like it when their country's full of war and people dying? But this old didn't have as much control as she thought, as most leaders, and there was a coup coming. This video is about coups. Remember, and specifically the CIA and their involvement in coups around the world. On March 23rd, 1976, 3 years after my father was born, I don't know. Fun fact, leading up to the coup, military leaders alongside CIA support were finalizing their plans and positioning their forces across the country to get rid of Isabel. Mrs. Perón. May Peronism die. On March 24th, 1976, a single day later, after the previous date I read, they were ready to put their plans into action. Tanks, troops pushed through without much resistance into major cities. Around 1 a.m., Isabel Perón was detained and taken by helicopter to El Mesador residence, and a few hours later, all TV and radio stations were interrupted by a military march. And this was a broadcast telling the nation that they were under the control of the General Commander's junta of the armed forces.
Colocado al borde de la disgregación, la intervención de las Fuerzas Armadas ha constituido la única alternativa posible.
Mr. CIA kept a close and watchful eye to stop the spread of communism, and they dug their hands deep in Operation Condor and the dirty war of South America. There were over 9 coups, somewhere between 9 and 100 coups between the 50s and 70s, most of which the CIA was directly involved in, which is pretty funny. Working in the shadows to remove people from power and stop the spread of communism and just kill people, it seems like. That's what it seems like a lot of this was to do. Now, if we travel back in time a year to 1975 again, we get to the Australian coup.
We realize this could get dangerous.
Let it go, Tom. Let's go.
That's right, guys. The Australian coup.
It was the standard regime change playbook that the US uses in every nation from Iran to the Philippines, where Victor Marchetti later told a Congress hearing that the CIA's aim in Australia was to get rid of a government they did not like, that was not cooperative. It's Chile, but in a much more sophisticated and subtle form. Cue the cognitive dissonance.
What the f***? An Australian coup? Isn't Australia like, kind of like us? Like just a shittier version of just America and Britain and stuff? That's what I thought. Also known as the Australian Constitutional Crisis of 1975, or just the Australian Coup of 1975, was a crisis detailing the controversies and eventual dismissal of then Prime Minister Whitlam. Terrible name, to be honest. Terrible ass name. Mr. Whitlam was a part of the Labour Party of Australia. That's one of those weird political parties. They got like more than 2, which is kind of cringe in my opinion. That's sarcastic. by the way. This was at the time of his election in 1972. Whitlam's successful election had ended the 23-year reign of the Liberal Country Coalition, which was a massive deal in the 70s in Australia. However, it is believed that his eventual dismissal in 1975 had a direct involvement from Mr. CIA. Okay? This is based on his relations with the US and his actions that went directly against them.
The US built this huge cooperative space station called Pine Gap, which if you don't know anything about it, let's explain it this way. Do you remember the movie The Dish? Because completely forget that, this was just to spy on the Chinese. Looks like Chairman Mao is eating noodles again. Right down what time? Whitlam discovered a bunch of information they were deliberately withholding from us, their allies, using the guise that they're just protecting their little brother. No, it's okay, US. You don't have to be patronizing to us. We're Aussies. We're patronizing enough to ourselves, thank you. One of these secrets is that they're actually using Pine Gap to bomb Cambodia, essentially just for the lols. I always wondered what happened to lurkers on 4chan before 4chan existed. Apparently they just took up jobs in the CIA. So Whitlam said to the US, how about you abide by the contract you signed with us, otherwise I'm closing down Pine Gap, which was taken aboard as constructive criticism by our great friends, the US, and by that I mean, as former senior CIA officer Victor Marchetti explained, a kind of Chile coup was set in motion.
You can't go against the US, guys. You can't do that. You'll lose. Haven't you heard that baller Joe Biden speech? We invented the finish line or whatever? We own it. What did he say?
We are America, second to none, and we own the finish line. Don't forget it.
I forget.
Minnesota!
Whitlam had strong ties to the US before he was elected, and in 1964 he received a leader travel grant and spent 3 months studying under both US military and government officials. Basically, this is him sitting in that chair from that one movie with Ryan Gosling in it, and they're just like edging. They're just like, cannot edge all day, edging. Cannot talk to woman, Riz. Find the meme. Find the meme. Somebody find the meme. Put it in the video. What is that movie where he gets what? Where he gets manipulated. Soon as this rat bastard was elected to office, he began leading a quite controversial career, not only within Australia, but also in US affairs, which you cannot do, guys, unless you want twice back in the head. Stop! Whitlam pulled a bit of a meme. As soon as he came to power within Australia, he pulled all Australian forces out of Vietnam and criticized the US bombings of North Vietnam, which is a big no.
Whitlam's Minister for Labour, Clyde Cameron, met with Marshall early on and said, what if we wanted to nationalise all of the industries that US corporations are currently sucking off in Australia, to which his response was, quote, oh, we'll just move in. Bet you weren't taught that in Year 8 history? Still think politics is boring in Australia? Come on. How is this less interesting than Feminists Getting Owned on Campus Volume 600? He then had CIA operatives infiltrate both major parties, the trade unions, the bureaucracy of Australia, and then bugged Parliament.
Not only did Whitlam criticize the US, but numerous ministers had also criticized the action. So, pretty bad, honestly. That's not good. He shouldn't have done that. Only a few months later, after he took power in 1973, US Secretary of State William Rogers told Richard Nixon, the least corrupt president of all time, that leftists within the Labor Party would try to throw overboard all military alliances and eject our highly classified US defense space installations from Australia. They were not that big of fans of this guy Whitlam and his PMs or whatever they call him out there. President? I don't know, dude. King? Might as well be king. Also in 1973, Whitlam would stop the ASIS, Australian Secret Intelligence Service, involvement with the CIA in their work to overthrow Chilean President Salvador Allende, who had Marxist ideas and would eventually be overthrown by the CIA anyways, and replaced with a classy little dictatorship to stop the spread of communism in South America, guys.
The National Congress chose Allende, and he began to implement many socialist reforms. These helped bolster his popularity, but the Americans withdrew aid to Chile, and the country suffered through mass inflation. Plus, his close connections with socialist leaders like Castro worried many on the right, So in Parliament they united to form the Confederation of Democracy and stopped further reforms. And the CIA helped fund opposition to Allende, like the El Mercurio newspaper, which called for him to be overthrown.
Nothing says democracy like spreading democracy. You know? Hey man, rules for thee, not for me. You guys don't get democracy, you get a dictatorship. Because you're too stupid to vote. You're too stupid to vote. Or whatever they believed. I don't know. That's not what I believe. This is where shit gets really interesting. In March of 1973, it seems like March is the month, or around March and April are the months where everything important politically has ever happened. Whitlam's Attorney General raided the Australian Security Intelligence Organization headquarters, and it was said by CIA agents present that the Australian Federal Police barged in and searched the place.
Whitlam also wished to investigate the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation since it had previously spied on his party. He had them raided in 1973 and demanded a list of all CIA operatives in Australia. And soon after this, he publicly accused numerous people in positions of power of being American spies as well. And the Americans did not respond well to this and made it clear that if Whitlam continued down this road, the US would be forced to make adjustments.
The public then began to distrust Whitlam's intentions. One journalist, Brian Toohey, said that Whitlam's government was a major threat to the United States. Which public? Our public? Or the public of Australia? Or any other public that has ever existed? By 1974, probably in March, this man was in hot water, not only with the US, but also with the Australian public. I lied. It was also with the Australian public. He kept trying to pass budget bills, which went against the Australian Constitution. This guy kind of sucked. This led to a double dissolution, which had only happened twice in Australian history. Double dissolution is kind of like a holdup in court. You just pass deadlocks. People don't agree, and you just gotta I don't know. I don't know, dude. They got weird laws out there. I'm not gonna learn it. Whitlam's opposition, the Liberal Country Party, had a majority of the Senate and kept rejecting his shitty bills. It would even take a joint sit down to eventually pass 6 bills that had even been proposed. This type of behavior and these actions made this man extremely unpopular within his own country. And while some of his bills were good intentioned, his actions were viewed as unconstitutional repeatedly. And this is where it was believed that the CIA really became involved, because that's what we do, guys. We uphold the Constitution. That's generally what we do, I think.
Whitlam called for an election in 1974, and whilst he won the House, he lost the Senate, meaning more deadlock and no more spending. Not to worry though, because foreigners exist. And Whitlam had the authority to borrow money through Australia's Loan Council without the Senate's approval. Whitlam's government didn't tell the Loans Council though, and secretly tried to borrow money from Saudi Arabia. This was leaked, and so the politicians involved did something clever. They lied. And when these lies became public, they were promptly sacked and Whitlam's reputation was damaged.
Within the same year, Whitlam ordered the ASIO to sever all ties with the CIA, which is a really bad idea, especially if you don't want to get killed by the CIA. And this request was ignored by Peter Barber, head of the ASIO, and all operations between the two agencies went covert to escape the Prime Minister's knowledge. Yeah, exactly. It's pretty wild. In April of 1974, so it was March, Whitlam gave a statement saying, "The Australian government takes the attitude that there should not be foreign military bases, stations, and installations in Australia. We honour agreements covering existing stations. We do not favour the extension or prolongation of any of those existing ones. G'day. Mate, get me another shrimp on the Barbie, mate." Mr. Whitlam would then go on to threaten to close all CIA bases in the country and threaten to reveal the identities of the CIA agents in the country. CIA bases at Pine Gap, ever heard of it? Kind of a couple cool videos on YouTube of it. And the Joint Defense Facility at were both extremely strategic bases for the US that were threatened to be exposed. Obviously, it's in Oceania. It's a pretty important part of the world, It's a good staging ground for aggravating assets to China and the USSR and stuff. Entering 1975, Prime Minister Whitlam would be under a lot of pressure. Whitlam had already dealt with the backlash from the US and the double dissolution from within his own government. Now he had gotten into more trouble as he had begun filling free vacancies within the House and Senate in attempts to switch the majority to the Labour Party after the 1974 election, which is kind of not a good idea. Once again, if you don't want to get killed by the CIA.
To further add insult to injury, a Labour Party senator resigned and was replaced against convention by a Conservative, meaning for Whitlam he had zero chance of getting anything through the Senate anymore. Despite this though, Whitlam refused to resign or give his consent to new elections, which the government general needed to call them. And this is where the crisis begins in earnest.
And then finally, on November 11th, 1975, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam would be dismissed by Governor General Sir John Kerr.
The Governor General of Australia at this time was a man called John Kerr, a close friend of Whitlam's who was deeply concerned about the deadlock in government. And so Kerr came up with a brilliant solution. He fired Whitlam and appointed the leader of the opposition, Malcolm Fraser, as Prime Minister in his stead.
Following these events, an election was held and Fraser won in a landslide, securing the Liberal Country Coalition back to power. Here is a speech from Whitlam that he gave shortly after being dismissed, which was iconic for his quips and passive-aggressive nature to the Governor General. You can tell they just wanted to just kill each other, and they wanted there to be open rebellion.
Well may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor General.
Democracy manifest, a succulent Chinese meal.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest. Have a look at the headlock here. See that chap over there?
That's real footage, by the way. It's real footage of him right there. Just kidding. It's other footage. Democracy Manifest. Look at this. Look at all these people. Look at that guy. Isn't it cool that they still wore wigs back then? Powdered wigs. Man, see? It's me. Oh, look at that guy's haircut. I think it's time to let it go. He's got a Fallout mohawk. Yeah. That's awesome. Love that. Now, if you'd believe this, it seemed that all those involved with the dismissal of Whitlam were somehow in some way directly tied to the US, and this led many to believe that the CIA directly influenced Kerr to remove the Prime Minister, which does make sense. Why would you want to upset the US? I mean, we're the good guys. That's not to say we're the bad guys, but we're definitely the good guys, though. You see, Kerr had been a part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was a conservative group that was being secretly funded by the CIA. Some further evidence of the CIA's involvement includes a CIA contractor decoded messages from the Pine Gap base and states that the CIA wanted Whitlam out of their office after he said he would close the Pine Gap base. So you say, I'm gonna close that Walmart. Mr. Walmart is gonna eliminate you, basically, is what that says. That's what that means. It's happened before. I mean, you know, I feel like there was a president maybe that was killed after saying he wanted to dissolve the CIA. Oh no, that's the one that he's still alive right now, I think. I don't know. Further information from the decoded messages state that Kerr was referred to by the CIA as our man Kerr, and that they had infiltrated Australian politics and unions to help overthrow Whitlam. So basically, the CIA threw a coup in Australia, which is awesome.
At this point, I know there's going to be one cunty comment that goes, oh, that's just election fixing. That's not a coup, idiot. First off, chew on my fat, salty nuts.
Also, a former CIA officer, Victor Marchetti, said that after the threats to close the spy bases in Australia, the CIA and MI6 worked together to overthrow the Prime Minister. MI6 has probably more pull in Australia because of the Queen or whatever. They got a Queen. Pretty lame. Funny little fun fact too, near the height of Whitlam's controversy in 1974, a White House ambassador with the title the Coup Master was sent to Australia.
The Nixon administration then made the man who definitely never had inappropriate fantasies about his daughter, Marshall Green, ambassador to Australia. Nothing sus about that. The man that orchestrated the coup that replaced the Indonesian government with a dictator.
Marshall Green, this guy who got his nickname from his pivotal role in the 1965 coup against Sukarno of Indonesia.
Green also orchestrated overthrowing Greece's government, just to show how much America, the liberators of the world, really care about democracy, setting up in its birthplace a military junta. Fuck. How crap would Marshall Green be at Secret Santa?
Here, Timmy, I got you a president for life.
And with that shining record, he was then assigned to Australia right after Whitlam told the Americans that Australia is not its toy. Coincidence.
During this time in which Marshall Green was directly involved in, there was a mass murder of about 500,000 communists in Indonesia as well. But the coup master, he helped out Australia. Fast forward 2 years to 1977, Warren Christopher, the United States Deputy Secretary of State, made a trip to Australia in which he told Whitlam that on behalf of President Jimmy Carter, the US would never again interfere with Australia's democratic process. Thank you, Jimmy Carter, for putting your foot down. This statement, as you can imagine, is often used as evidence of the CIA's involvement with removing Whitlam from office as the, again, It infers that it has happened before. Or maybe it doesn't. Oh yeah, by the way, follow the money. Lastly, a guy named William Blum, an American journalist, once wrote that Nugan Hand Bank, an Australian bank, not sure why the it's got that name, had alleged connections to the CIA and helped transfer 2.4 million AUD to the Liberal Party of Australia to help overthrow Whitlam. So money as well. They gave him money as well, allegedly, or whatever.
Why are we not taught this shit? Nor were we taught about the fact that the CIA offered the Liberal Party $24 million laundered through an Australian bank to beat the Whitlam government. Can you imagine how much $24 million would have bought you back then? Would have made even Clive Palmer go, now there is a limit to how many ads you can cram onto television.
That's kind of an interesting one because Australia is not South America, or that's like part of Britain. Australia isn't South America or Southeast Asia or a communist country, really. We just didn't really give a fuck in the 70s, the troubled times. So we started off in the US with a business plot, then we went to Brazil, then we went to Argentina, then we went to Australia. Let's go to California. The Symbionese Liberation Army. Have you ever heard of it, guys? Probably not, because it's some really deep, weird shit. While the CIA was working hard across the globe installing dictatorships and killing commies, it seems they were also at work on home soil as well. The United Federated Forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA for short, were a far-left terrorist group that resided and operated in California. They believed in anti-capitalism, anti-fascism, and vanguardism, which is a separate version of Leninism. It's all these ancient Soviet shits, or not Soviet. God, I've been talking for a really long time. It's been 2 hours. I've been just yapping. It gets really complicated. I get lost on it a lot. Soviet, far after Marxism. Lenin was a Marxist, and then communism is like a thing. Fucking orthodox Marxist communism, Leninism, vanguardism. It's too much to learn about. Too much has happened. What's in my nose right now? What the fuck? Oh, it's a really long mustache hair. That was weird. I kind of look like young Lenin. Or young Stalin, rather. Not young Lenin. What the fuck? I look nothing like young Vladimir Lenin. What the SLA envisioned their organization to be similar to South American urban guerrillas, and they shared some ideas with Maoism, also massive at the time. This organization was founded by Donald DeFries, aka General Field Marshal Clinique, in 1973 when he escaped from Soledad State Prison after serving 5 years to life for robbing a prostitute. Why would you rob a prostitute? I assume he wanted his money back. Bizarrely enough, DeFries began his recruitment of commies while in prison due to a prison outreach program through UC Berkeley that was backed by Professor Colston Westbrook. This guy will be important later, all right? Students from UC Berkeley at the time were typically white social activists, and DeFries' ideology attracted a lot of them to join the SLA movement. Some of the OGs in the SLA include Nancy Ling Perry and Patricia Solchisk, both UC Berkeley students and geniuses who DeFries met while he was in prison. Very interesting guy. Solchisk and DeFries wrote the first SLA manifesto. Every good group has to have a manifesto. I'm gonna write the Oompaville manifesto pretty soon. Once I finish this video, I'm not even halfway through. Epically enough, the SLA collabed with another little group in the 60s and 70s called the Venceremos, a radical Chicano group that was based in California during the time. Being friends with them, collabing with them allowed DeFries to escape the law because he stayed at Venceremos safe houses across San Francisco and Los Angeles. It would only be a few months after DeFries escaped from prison that the SLA would become active officially in California, and their first attack would be the murder of a guy named Marcus Foster, a school superintendent in Oakland who they believe was a fascist because of his new policy where students would be required to have ID cards. Totally fascist. Absolutely 100% fascist. Definitely deserving of a murder. What a nice looking guy too. What a bunch of freaks. The Goobers also attempted to murder the replacement superintendent, Robert Blackburn, for supporting Foster's beliefs. He was shot with a sawed-off shotgun, but he survived because he's a badass. 2 SLA members were arrested, Russell Little and Joseph Ramiro, though they said Solczyk had shot Foster and DeFries and Ling had shot Blackburn. The next action of the SLA would be to kidnap Patty Hearst, an heiress to a multimedia and mining fortune based in California. Multimedia in the 70s? What the f does that look like? Goddamn, I didn't even know they had multimedia then. Paper and video. sound. They wanted to use Patty as leverage to free their members from prison and help push their political agenda. Terrorists taking hostages. Ultimately, their fellow members would remain in prison. However, their demands to form a food distribution system would come to fruition for a little while, and initially they demanded $4 million as a ransom, which would be given to them in the form of food donations to food banks. But that eventually skyrocketed to $400 million because they heard that $4 million, like another Austin Powers moment. What the fuck's going on here? $400 billion of food to the poor. Eventually it would stop Vitali style because of large crowds forming and people getting hurt from volunteers throwing boxes of food out of moving trucks. It was insane. After all this, in a strange twist of story, Miss Hearst would succumb to Stockholm Syndrome and join the SLA with a fiery passion for their beliefs. Crazy.
Up in Hillsborough, California, hearing their daughter described no longer as a witness but as a criminal now, the Hearsts had this to say.
I just hope everybody will remember that physically Patty is still a kidnapped victim. She was taken away against her will. And psychologically, she's a victim of thought control by terrorists.
On April 15th, 1974, 1 month after my favorite month, March, the group robbed the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco, in which 3 SLA members took part. Patty is even seen brandishing a rifle. Look at her. That's crazy. She looks like an SCP. DeFreeze was seen in the bank, and there was another unknown member, probably Donnie Rhubarb. The SLA group stole $10,000 to fuel their organization. There's even security footage of the bank robbery, which is awesome. I didn't even know they had security footage in the 70s. How does that even work? Oh, it looked like shit. If they have security footage that high quality in the 70s, why the is there anything blurry now? The SLA would eventually lose some of its steam when a robbery gone wrong led to the death of all their founding members. Big giant L. 3 members, William Harris, Emily Harris, and Patty Hearst, went to a sporting goods store to get supplies, but William tried to steal a bandolier because he's an idiot. He was confronted by a security guard, pulled out a revolver. He was half handcuffed, and Hearst, watching the van outside, saw what was going on in the store and began to shoot, allowing the Harrises to flee to the van. The 3 of them eventually abandoned the van, and most of the SLA fled to a safe house after seeing news coverage of the event. The police found the van, and they found a parking ticket with an address to the safe house, which is kind of a gigantic, massive L, and the police also would just show up based on an anonymous call saying there was a group of heavily armed people at their daughter's home, which is awesome as well. As soon as the police showed up, a massive shootout would begin. Cops had fully automatic weapons, where the SLA had modified M1 carbines that could also shoot full auto. Eventually, it turned into a full-on siege. Shit like this was crazy. Didn't happen much in Cali. The LAPD used tear gas on the house, and one of the canisters would catch the house on fire, and this is where the SLA genuinely would begin to just fall apart.
More than an hour, thousands of rounds of automatic weapons and small gunfire were exchanged between police and the suspects inside the house. 6 tear gas assaults were made in an attempt to flush out the fugitives, until finally, houses on either side, as well as the pink wood and stucco fortress, caught fire. A fire believed to have been started by an exploding gas canister.
Nancy Ling Perry would leave the house shooting her gun, and she got shot and killed. Another member, Camilla Hall, who also left with Perry, was shot but dragged back into the house. DeFreeze, like any great leader of a cult does, took his own life in a small crawl space of the home. Solchitsk and a couple other people all died from smoke inhalation in the house, so it's pretty bad. And finally, the Harrises and Patty Hearst would remain at large until a subsequent bank robbery in 1975. Hearst put out a recording talking about the lost members of the SLA and her strong beliefs in their stuff. It's pretty crazy, and the whole thing is wild.
Sim Q loved the people with tenderness and respect. He helped me see that it's not how long we live that's important, it's how we live. Jelena was beautiful. She exploded with a desire to kill the pig.
So, what does all this have to do with the CIA? You probably forgot we were in a CIA video, didn't you? You probably did, you bastard. During Patty Hearst's trial, a tape was played where at the end, DeFreeze would talk about how he wanted to kill Colston Westbrook. That guy in prison, the UC Berkeley guy, remember him? He said that he was a government agent working with military intelligence. Like we mentioned earlier, Westbrook often recommended students from UC Berkeley to go to the prison program where DeFreeze would recruit his first members. Westbrook was a former CIA advisor to the CIA in South Korea and specialized in the indoctrination of assassination and terrorist cadres. What? What the fuck? Are you telling me that this shit, hold on a second. Furthermore, when Mr. Westbrook came back from South Korea in 1970, he would be assigned to run the Black Cultural Association, the same program that he would recommend students to meet inmates. He was also the control officer for Mr. DeFreeze. Additionally, DeFreeze had worked as an informant for the Public Disorder Intelligence Unit for the LAPD. So it's really confusing and bizarre. It's believed that the SLA was created to combat the Black Panther Party, which at the time was the dominant political movement and party within California that everyone was scared of, especially politicians. Evidence of this includes the assassination of Mr. Marcus Foster, which we talked about earlier, the superintendent of the school. He had agreed to implement Black Panther Party educational policies into his school districts. Even more evidence is from an investigator known as Lake Headley. I don't believe that's a real name, but anyways, let's pretend that it is. He was a former police intelligence officer, which is like kind of a lame CIA agent. Him and his team were hired to investigate the death of SLA member Willie Wolf. Based on their investigation, they concluded that the SLA was part of the CIA's Chaos program, which was a domestic espionage program that went from 1967 to 1974. They also concluded that the SLA was trying to kill Black Panther Party leader Huey Newton for his close ties to Marcus Foster. I'm bad with names. Look at Huey Newton. It'd be cooler if he had a better gun, to be honest. That's kind of a lame gun. He's got like, it looks like he's about to go hunting or something for like Cape Buffalo. Like a frog gig. Probably some religious artifact that I just made fun of. Now, people are under the belief that the SLA was a trained assassination squad by the CIA to combat the Black Panther Party, and that Westbrook would work with DeFreeze and other members to supply them with weapons, intel, and housing within the California prison system and college campuses to find new members for their squad. How unbelievable is that? That's crazy! This idea also explains how DeFreeze was quite literally able to walk out of the prison he was held in and just escape the law magically. So yeah, the SLA was probably a direct result of the CIA's Chaos program and was fully developed to fight the Black Panther Party on American soil. Pretty cool. A coup within the United States. Oh yeah, and they went rogue, apparently, too. That's another part of the story. It is believed that the CIA had the SLA terminated when DeFreeze went rogue and was no longer listening to the CIA's directions. The SLA's ideologies, by the way, were directly against what the CIA wanted, and when DeFreeze let his beliefs fully take over, they could no longer aid him. They killed him. Dead. Shootout, siege, the end.